Another day, another lopsided US-Russia prisoner exchange. This time it's Marc Fogel, an American teacher who just walked free after 2 years in a Russian prison. Sounds like good news, right? Not so fast. Because if you've been paying attention, you already know how this game works. Every US prisoner swap isn't just about bringing Americans home. It's a power play, a PR stunt, or sometimes straight-up ransom. And no two countries play this game more ruthlessly than the US and Russia. The Cold War may be over on paper, but in the world of prisoner swaps, it's alive and kicking. Russia detains Americans under questionable circumstances, and in return, they get back spies, arms dealers, or contract killers. So the real question isn't who got released, but who did we give up this time? Fogel, 67 years old, a teacher, no military ties, no political connections, no reason to be a threat. And yet, in August 2021, Russian authorities arrested him at a Moscow airport for carrying medical marijuana, legally prescribed in the US for his chronic pain. Russia threw him into a high-security penal colony for 14 years. Because, you know, an American teacher with a few grams of weed is totally the same as an international drug trafficker, right? But here's the thing. Fogel was never just another foreigner breaking the law. He was a pawn in Russia's hostage game, waiting for the right moment to be cashed in. And on February 11, 2025, after years of pressure and back-channel negotiations, the US got him back. But at what cost? Fogel was arrested around the same time as Brittany Griner, but guess who got out first? Griner, a WNBA star, was swapped in 2022 for Victor Bout, aka the Merchant of Death, a Russian arms dealer so dangerous they literally made a Hollywood movie about him. Bout spent years selling weapons to terrorists, warlords, and armed militias. He was supposed to rot in prison for 25 years, until Russia pulled the ultimate hostage stunt and traded him for Griner, a basketball player caught with a vape pen. Russia celebrated like they just won the World Cup. The Kremlin spun it as a victory over American hypocrisy, showing that if you hold an American long enough, the US will fold. So who won that trade? Russia got a global arms dealer with deep black market connections. The US got a PR boost. Then there's Trevor Reed, a former US Marine who got drunk in Moscow in 2019. The official story? He assaulted Russian police officers. The real story? He was an easy target. His trial was a joke. Even the judge reportedly laughed at the evidence. But justice wasn't the point. Leverage was. And guess what? It worked. In April 2022, the US caved, handing over Konstantin Yaroshenko, a convicted Russian drug smuggler caught running a massive cocaine trafficking ring. Sounds fair, right? The Kremlin cheered. America patted itself on the back and Moscow took notes. Hostage-taking works. And just a few months later, they pushed for an even bigger demand. Just when you thought Russia couldn't push the envelope any further, they forced the West to hand over a convicted assassin, all in exchange for 3 American prisoners. By August 1, 2024, the Biden administration and its European allies struck a deal, securing the release of Evan Gershkovich, a Wall Street Journal reporter accused of espionage without evidence. Paul Whelan, a former Marine, imprisoned since 2018 because Russia figured out Americans in uniform make great bargaining chips. Alsu Kurmasheva, a Russian-American journalist arrested in Putin's crackdown on the press. 3 Americans finally came home. But at what price? Because Russia wasn't trading for some low-level hacker or businessman. They wanted Vadim Krasikov, a Russian FSB assassin who executed a man in broad daylight in Berlin. Why did the US and Germany give in? Because Russia played the long game, and they played it well. For over a year, the US and Germany tried offering other Russian prisoners, but Moscow refused. They made it crystal clear. No Krasikov, no deal. And when 3 Americans were rotting in Russian prisons, Washington folded. Germany, despite years of swearing they'd never release an assassin, suddenly changed their mind, proving that if Russia pushes hard enough, the West always blinks first. Before Russia perfected the art of hostage diplomacy, they were already playing the long game, planting deep cover spies right under America's nose. And when the US finally caught them in 2010, what did Washington do? Trade them right back like an unwanted Amazon return. Let's rewind. For over a decade, a network of Russian deep cover agents lived in the US, blending in like your average suburban neighbors. They had families, jobs, mortgages, PTA meetings, except instead of planning soccer practice, they were passing intel to Moscow. The FBI spent years tracking them in Operation Ghost Stories, because let's be honest, calling it the Great American Intelligence Failure would have been too on the nose. Then, in June 2010, the US finally arrested 10 Russian spies, including the now infamous Anna Chapman, a red-haired femme fatale who instantly became a media sensation because, Well, she was hot. The others? Less glamorous, but just as committed to infiltrating American society. And then, Washington did what Washington does best: fumble the bag. Instead of actually interrogating them, putting them on trial, or squeezing every last bit of intelligence out of them, the US shipped them right back to Moscow, just days after their arrest. No serious punishments, no deep briefings, just a straight-up trade. And for what? Who did the US get in return? A grand total of 4 prisoners from Russian custody, including Sergei Skripal, a former Russian military officer turned British double agent, Igor Sutyagin, an arms control researcher convicted of passing classified information to the West. Now, these weren't random nobodies, but let's be real. The United States traded 10 highly trained deep cover agents, people embedded in American society, trained to blend in, infiltrate, and compromise national security, for a handful of guys Russia was already done with. And how did Moscow react? Like they had just conquered Washington. Russia welcomed their spies home like war heroes, parading them around Moscow as proof they could plant agents in the US, get caught, and still come out ahead. Anna Chapman? She became an overnight celebrity, scoring TV gigs, fashion deals, and even a spot in Putin's inner circle. She offered to marry Edward Snowden because apparently nothing says loyal Russian patriot like a KGB-styled reality romance. Meanwhile, the United States? We got a diplomatic faceplant and a lesson in why Russia plays to win. While we apparently play by the everyone gets a participation trophy rulebook. And if Washington had learned anything from this disaster, they might have realized that next time Russia makes a trade, they won't be asking for just some washed-up double agents. By now, you know the game. Russia grabs an American, drags out negotiations, and then demands spies, assassins, or international criminals in return. Every swap is a masterclass in diplomatic humiliation, where the US gets a teacher or a journalist, and Russia gets a war criminal or arms dealer. But in 2024, there was one trade that never happened, because Russia never intended to let it happen. Enter Alexei Navalny, Putin's worst nightmare. Navalny exposed Kremlin corruption, rallied protests, survived state-sponsored assassination attempts, and still refused to back down. He was the opposition leader Putin couldn't ignore, so when poisoning him didn't work, the Kremlin locked him up for good. For a brief moment, it looked like Navalny might actually be part of a historic prisoner exchange. The rumored deal? The US and its allies would trade high-value Russian prisoners, spies, cybercriminals, intelligence assets. In return, Russia would release Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, because Russia never trades just one hostage. Other detained Western citizens. And Navalny. A massive, headline-making exchange. Sounds too good to be true, right? That's because it was. Let's be real, Navalny was never leaving Russia alive. But dangling him as a possible trade, that was a brilliant power move. By late 2023, Russia and the West were deep in negotiations. The US and Europe had already handed over spies, arms dealers, and traffickers, but they still had a few high-value Russians locked up. And for the first time, whispers started. Could Navalny actually be part of a trade? It made sense, on paper. The Kremlin wanted their spies and cybercriminals back. The West wanted to bring their citizens home, and throwing in Navalny would make the deal historic. By early 2024, reports suggested Washington, Germany, France, and Britain were all working behind the scenes to broker the deal. And then, in February 2024, Navalny died in a Russian prison. Coincidence? Please. For anyone paying attention, this was classic Putin. Russia kept the West negotiating, kept them believing a deal was possible, kept them guessing how much they were willing to give up. And then, they killed the deal, literally. Navalny's sudden, unexpected death wasn't just about eliminating a political threat. It was about humiliating the West. Because let's not forget, the United States and its allies were already deep in discussions when Navalny died. Russia never intended to trade him. They just wanted to watch the West waste time. By killing him, Putin made sure the opposition had no leader, and that Washington had no leverage. Navalny was never going to walk free. He was a pawn in a bigger game, and the Kremlin played it perfectly. Final score: Russia wins. Again. So let's break it down. The United States thought they could negotiate Navalny's release. Russia played along. The moment Putin decided Navalny was no longer useful, he eliminated him. The West got nothing. No deal, no swap, no leverage. Just another cold, calculated reminder that Putin doesn't play fair and never will. After 6 rounds of US-Russia swaps, one thing is painfully clear. Russia isn't negotiating. Russia is winning. Every time the United States agrees to another swap, they reinforce the cycle. They reward bad behavior and teach Russia that hostage-taking works. And here's why Washington keeps losing. Russia plays the long game. They're willing to keep Americans locked up for years, knowing the United States will crack under political pressure. They always ask for more. One Marine, That'll cost you a drug trafficker. One journalist? That'll be an arms dealer. Every swap tilts in Russia's favor. They don't care about fairness. Washington negotiates like it's a business deal. Russia negotiates like it's war. They know the West values optics. American politicians need big wins to boost approval ratings, and Russia is happy to provide one, at a heavy cost. And now, the Navalny case just proved Russia doesn't even have to make a deal to manipulate the West. Russia now knows it can keep demanding assassins, spies, and war criminals in exchange for Americans. And if the United States won't play along, they'll just keep taking more hostages. So, here's the real question. Should Washington refuse all future swaps, even if it means leaving Americans behind, to break the cycle? Or is bringing people home always worth the cost, no matter how steep the price? Let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because as long as Russia keeps playing this game, we'll be here to break it down.